Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly, and welcome to the space. Today, we are going to be talking about some more definitions. So, I know within the first episode, we went over definitions, we went over structure, and we went over some things of what you can expect from this podcast. And I'd like to continue that into today, but focusing more on the definitions within asexuality and a little bit of the history as well. I did some really interesting research and found a lot from the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, AVEN, that we will be including a lot, as well as from asexuals.net. I believe that website is primarily a dating and connection site, but they do have a lot of really cool facts on that website, such as history, also going over definitions and labels under asexuality. They also talk about aromanticism, and so I found a lot of cool facts that I would like to share with you guys. We're going to start now with some definitions. So I know the last time that we spoke with each other, we went over the definition of asexuality from AVEN. And so I'd like to revisit that definition and just restate that asexuality is defined as the lack of sexual attraction or a lack of sexual attraction. Now, the other term that I want to introduce that you're going to hear me say a lot on this podcast is allosexuality. So this is actually asexuality's opposite. It is the ability to experience sexual attraction, and that definition is from healthline.com. You can kind of compare it to heterosexuality. So if heterosexuality is the complete opposite of homosexuality, then allosexuality is the complete opposite of asexuality. We will be using this term a lot, and you'll hear me use the shorthand term for ace and then the short term for allosexuality, which is just allo. And so we are going to be using those terms to compare ace and allo experiences. And so I wanted to introduce that term and define it for you guys so that we could have more understanding in the terms we will be using. So now, asexuality is an umbrella term. It is a very wide umbrella that encompasses a lot of different identities, all identities based on how people experience sexual attraction differently from allosexual people. So the first definition, or the first label that I wanted to talk about under asexuality is demisexuality. So the shorthand term is just demi, but demisexuality, also from AVEN, is feeling no sexual attraction towards other people unless a strong emotional bond has been established. So just to say that again, demisexuality is defined by feeling no sexual attraction unless you have a strong emotional attachment first. This is really important because that shows a difference, again, in how people experience sexual attraction. Some people don't experience it at all, and some people experience it only after a very, very strong emotional bond has been formed. The next definition that I wanted to talk about, or the next label that fits under asexuality, is the idea of gray sexuality. So Gray, Grey, whatever spelling is your preference, these people are in the gray area under the asexuality umbrella. Again, from AVEN, they have some semblance of sexuality, like feel some sort of sexual attraction, but it is far lower than almost anybody who identifies or feels that they are allo. So again, gray sexuality is defined by people within the gray area between asexuality and allosexuality. They may experience it in experience sexual attraction that is within different periods of their life. They may swing back and forth, but it's kind of that undefined region that encompasses the gray sexual experience. The next term the next label that I wanted to define is the term aseflux. So this is when someone's sexual orientation changes, so level of sexual attraction changes, but one may generally feel that they stay within the ace spectrum, sometimes feeling a change to no sexual attraction, and then to a lot of sexual attraction. This definition is from asexuals.net. And so this also, within that gray sexual aseflux community, there is a lot of motion between if one feels a lot of sexual attraction or no sexual attraction. It may depend on the person. It may depend on the day, the time, the feeling, any kind of factor. And this is what characterizes or may define the gray sexual or aseflux experience. But again, I want to reiterate that just because something is in motion does not mean that it is any less asexual than someone who may be sex repulsed or not sexually active. So the next term that I wanted to define, or the next label that I wanted to review, is the term ace spike. So the term ace spike, also from asexuals.net, is a term for those who usually don't experience sexual attraction. So they usually do not. But on occasion, they will feel sudden spikes of sexual attraction, but they last for a very, very short amount of time. And it can be for a variety of factors, but after that time, they return to then feeling no sexual attraction. Again, as I said before, all of these terms may rely on the person that one is engaging with, may rely on the feelings or, the comfortability with that person. There are a lot of factors that play into whether or not someone feels sexual attraction towards another person. So both Avon and asexuals.net have a lot of information on other identities as well as micro-labels within the community. I only included demisexuality, gray sexuality, aseflux, ace-spike, and then asexuality as a means of going over just some broad terms. Just because these are the only ones I've defined does not mean at all that there are no other identities within the ACE community or any other labels within the ACE community. Just because those labels are not included here does not diminish their validity in any way, does not mean that they do not exist, does not mean to diminish their identities. It merely means that asexuality, demisexuality, gray sexuality, aseflux, and ace-spike are some bigger terms that can characterize or give a brief overview of the other micro-labels that may, and micro-identities that may be under asexuality. So some other terms that I wanted to define, because they impact our discussion here, is the difference between sexual attraction, physical attraction, and then aesthetic attraction. These are some pretty big terms that impact the asexual community a lot because there are different kinds of attraction, and they are felt on a broad spectrum. And so what we should start with is sexual attraction. So, as I said in the first episode, sexual attraction does not equate sexual behavior. It does not. You may feel sexual attraction, but like those who are celibate or those who practice chastity or abstinence, you choose not to partake in that activity. Those who may feel no sexual desire, such as those who identify as asexual, may engage in sexual behavior and sexual practices. I think it might be better if we dip into history a little bit before we talk about the different types of attraction. And the reason why is, I think, when we go over how the term asexuality has developed, it might make defining those terms just that much easier, I think. So, again, as I said, asexuals.net and Avon have a lot of information about the history of asexuality. So, from what I found on asexuals.net, mentions of asexuality can be traced all the way back to the 19th century. I found this actually incredibly interesting because I feel like there has been work done, certainly, to show that homosexuality and different gender identities are not a new phenomenon. And I didn't really hear about the term asexuality, or I was told that the term asexuality wasn't really around until the 2000s. So looking at this history, hearing that there is mention of asexuality all the way back in the 19th century, aligning with homosexuality and other gender identities not being, again, that new phenomenon, was very, I think, validating to see and just super interesting to research. So Hungarian doctor Karl Maria Kertbeny coined the term monosexual in 1869. So monosexual he used in reference to people who only felt sexual desire towards themselves. He did a lot of research on heterosexual people. He labeled heterosexual people, homosexual people, and then monosexual people. So of course we know heterosexual meaning opposite gender, and then homosexual people meaning same gender, and then mono meaning self. So without all the, regale of research linguistics, he was basically referring to people who only find sexual satisfaction with themselves or only masturbate. So he was looking at people who found company with people of the opposite gender, people who found company within the same gender, and people who only found company with themselves rather than other people. So that was in 1869. Again, now, of course, I think the term asexuality wasn't used until much later on, but the idea that there was empirical research on those who did not have a desire for sex, I again found very, very interesting. So 1869, stay with me now. Then in 1896, so you just flip the two numbers, Magnus Hirschfeld, a German sexologist, mentioned people without any sexual desire in a pamphlet he published called Sappho and Socrates. This was very interesting because it took me on a whatever the term is for when a rabbit hole. It took me down a rabbit hole to the internet, and I found someone on actually Avon's database who did a lot of research and actually hand translated this sexologist's research. And what was included in his findings was case studies and actual accounts from people who he and another researcher of his had found to have no sexual desire. When I looked at what he found people who had no sexual desire, had no, who outwardly expressed a different gender than what they were born with. He had found people that were suffering from mental health issues because of the war, but that also found that their lack of sexual activity did not correlate with any kind of PTSD, mental health history, and the like. And so reading about these case studies and reading about these accounts from ordinary people in the late 1800s was very, very, very interesting. And I thought it was awesome, the research that he did, where I don't believe he used the term monosexual like Carl Maria Kurtbenny, but he still was looking at those without any sexual desire. And these were people of all genders, backgrounds, ages, who experienced no sexual attraction that he found. So that was the beginning that I found on asexuals.net, all the way back in 1869 to then 2001, when David J. made the Asexuality and Visibility Network site, so AVIN. When that was founded, there's that whole span of time where asexuality was a term that people were beginning to use, especially when the queer rights movement started really picking up. That term was always around, or something of the like. There was always recognition of people who felt heterosexual attraction, people who felt homosexual attraction, and then people who found they had no sexual attraction at all. Again, I thought this was kind of a new term, but it is not. And we can safely assume that even though the term was labeled in 1869 by Carl Maria Kurtbenny, an asexual identity, just like heterosexuality, homosexuality, and different gender identities, has existed way, 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 way before then. It is just incredible to me to think about such a lengthy history of asexuality, because although we are a newly recognized community within the umbrella and community of LGBTQIA+, asexual people have always been around. And I think that it is so validating and, again, just so interesting. So there's probably much more research that can be done about the history of asexuality, but this was kind of the synopsis that I found on asexuals.net. And so one other thing that intrigued me about Marcus Hirschfeld in 1896, his research, is that he did find people who experienced no sexual attraction but yet experienced romantic attraction. So now it's time to circle back and talk about those terms. So sexual attraction is when one feels a desire to have sex with a person. It's kind of, you can make it cut and dry like that, where sexual attraction is a desire to have sex with a person or a physical response to external stimuli. Romantic attraction is not the same as sexual attraction. So from Avon, attraction, there are different forms of attraction that can be romantic, aesthetic, or sensual in nature, but do not lead to a need to act out on that attraction sexually. So romantic attraction is the desire to be romantically involved with another person. Aesthetic attraction, which I mentioned, is an appreciation for one's appearance. Sensual attraction is the desire to engage in sensual but not sexual activities with a person, such as cuddling, hugging, or kissing. Now, that's like a very shortened version, I feel, of all those definitions. So again, we have sexual attraction, which is the desire to act upon attraction sexually, or to have sex, engage in sexual acts with a person. And then we have romantic attraction, a desire to be romantically involved with another person. Aesthetic attraction, which is for people's appearance. And then sensual attraction, which does not equate to sexual. You guys can't tell, but I'm wagging my finger. Does not equate to sexual attraction. And so you can experience, it is really important within the validity and totally encapsulating different asexual identities. It is important to note that people who may not experience sexual attraction, so asexual identifying individuals, can also experience romantic attraction, aesthetic attraction, and sensual attraction. So these things are all really, really important to keep in mind. And also to make sure that we understand and recognize that even allosexual people experience different levels of attraction and different types of attraction. And it is merely a way of characterizing, identifying, labeling, or talking about how those things affect our everyday lives, how those identities or feelings may affect who we are and how we perceive the world. So today, just to wrap up, we talked about definitions with asexuality, demisexuality, gray sexuality, ace flux, and ace spike identities. We also talked about some history of asexuality going back all the way to the 19th century and 1869. And we also dipped a little bit into defining attraction. That is sexual attraction, romantic attraction, aesthetic attraction, and sensual attraction. I'm very glad that I was able to define these terms for you guys so that in the future, if there's any more questions, I can of course address them, but if there's anything that you don't remember or that you want to come back to, you can come back to this episode and listen to all of the definitions and the history again. And maybe, who knows, you might do some interesting research on your own and figure out some really cool stuff about the history of asexuality. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time here at The Space.